Hey, greetings everyone. It is GleeCon, and we're here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. Thank you for tuning in. On the last episode, we continued our Thousand Needles Horde run, um, this time with our Restoration Shaman. He took a turn. We escorted a guy out of the Wyverns while we collected some of their eggs, and we killed Steel Snap, although we didn't turn it in yet. We killed Arikara. I think we actually soloed it. And then we made a failed attempt at the test of endurance. I failed it because every time you smash a crate, it creates more than one wave. But also, I don't know that I could have soloed it on my own anyway. We'll give that one a go. Maybe on the next episode, but probably a couple from now. So we'll talk game on the next episode. We've also been reading the War of the Scaleborn. It looks like we're already on the second part, even though we've only read 3 chapters so far. That was maybe the prelude. In that we established Valdrakken as a city. The half of the dragons in the world have been infused with the Titan's order magic, which is what has made them into the dragons that we know and love. Whereas the rest of the kind of proto-drakes out there want to stay wild. And they make a pact to just let one another be. But immediately, Alexstrasza, at the urging of the Titans, goes back on that pact and decides to start collecting wild, unprotected eggs from the wild to kind of bolster their numbers. Meanwhile, as the couple years pass, a few of the heavy hitters from the Drakes, people that we know about from playing Dragonflight, Iridikron, Fyrak, and Ralistraz, become infused and become essentially the primal version of an aspect. They become the primal incarnates, and they have their eyes set on Vyranoth to become the 4th. So here we go. Stay a while and listen as we kick off the second part. It's called A Growing Storm. From the oral histories of Nosdormu, the Timeless One. We'll have to see how long this little intro is. When one has lived through the ages, the seasons turn faster, ever faster. Months pass like moments, moving so swiftly that only the bronzes take note. Our kind has long marked time only by the rise and fall of the sun, by the seasonal migration of the herds, by the crack of eggshells and the first breaths of new life. The concept of keeping time is new to our kind. Annals and histories are even more foreign and strange, but I find myself compelled to recount these stories nonetheless. In the year we began construction on Wyrmrest Temple, Raszageth the Storm Eater joined Iridikron and Fyrak as an incarnate. The news sent the first ripple of fear through the Broodlands. The incarnate influence was spreading, and true to her nature, Raszageth was far more tempestuous than other members of her cohort. Perhaps Fyrak found joy in battle, but Raszageth derived it from killing. We believed her bolts struck our kind from the skies, though we could not prove it with absolute certainty and could not demand justice for those killed. Our flights continued to thrive despite growing opposition. We finished construction on Valdrakken, then on the Red Dragonflight's Ruby Life Pools. 20-odd years later, the Black Dragonflight completed the Obsidian Citadel, followed closely by the first of 2 great towers in the Azure Span, Vakthros, the heart of the Blue Dragonflight's power. For nearly 2 centuries, we did everything possible to build bridges with our primal kin, except for taking their babies. Due to its proximity to Harrow's Deep, Wyrmrest Temple became a center for our diplomatic endeavors. We encouraged primal dragons to join us there, which resulted in a few scattered successes. Those efforts halted, however, when the Winterscorn Vrykul captured hundreds of primal dragons and forced them to fight in the Titan-forged bloody civil war. The fighting grew so intense that Tyr called upon we 5 aspects to help him end it, and we gladly flew to his aid. We not only helped him defeat the Winterscorn, but Ysera and I also wove a spell that put the Vrykul into a deep, dreamless sleep. And that's touching on a lot of the history that you uncover when you do Wrath of the Lich King. Though we helped free our kin, the war gave primal dragons another reason not to trust the Keepers, the Titan-forged, and the Aspects ourselves. The primal dragons were furious that we did not destroy the Winterscorn outright for their crimes against our kind, pointing to our mercy as further evidence of our obeisance to the Keepers. Now the path to lasting peace seems muddled and fraught. As Aspects, we will continue to work toward a bright future for all dragonkind, although we would be remiss not to acknowledge the deadly storms brewing on the horizon. Okay, and now we're going to kick off Chapter 4. As the years passed, the ordered dragons expanded their dominion, yet Vyranoth remained unconvinced of the aspect's cause. Still, she made a point to visit Alexstrasza and the Broodlands when she could, if only to stay apprised of the aspect's activities. Today, Vyranoth's heart soared as she swooped over the waking shores on her way to meet Alexstrasza's newest clutch of whelps. There were few pleasures so gentle as meeting newborn whelplings, natural-born or ordered. The sun shone bright, warming her scales and filling her with a youthful, long-forgotten exuberance. She tucked her wings and dived through a red stone arch, enjoying the feeling of temporary weightlessness, then stretched them wide to catch the breeze. Dipping lower, she trailed her back talons in a river, startling a flock of ducks into flight. The whole world smelled alive. Flowers burst with the spring season, and fresh grass danced in the breeze. The Broodlands flourished under Alexstrasza's reign, and yet Vyranoth found herself no more willing to join the flights than before. Out of respect for Alexstrasza, Vyranoth had given order magic due consideration. The Dragonflight's fledgling civilization seemed inherently good, even honorable. She had watched their development with great interest, wondering if they would stay true to the lofty ideals upon which they had been founded. Indeed, they fulfilled the commands of their masters with a single-minded zeal, and that was precisely the problem. Vyranoth valued her agency, her free will, her ability to go where and when she desired. The Ordered enjoyed no such freedoms, having pledged themselves to the building up of the Dragonflights and the defense of the world at large. And as much as she loved her friends, she needed no queen to do her thinking for her. Iridikron was little better than the aspects themselves, altering himself for the sake of power. More than a century ago, he'd taken to calling himself an incarnate, positioning himself to be Dragonkind's best hope to remain free from the aspectral threat. He courted Vyranoth's favor incessantly, almost obsessively at times, sending his emissaries and promising her a place by his side. So now we have established that 100 years have passed. Or more. Only one time had he come to her himself, in the year after the aspects completed their work on Wormrest Temple. "I will ask you to join me but once," he had said to her. "Deny me, and I shall not trouble you again." Vyranoth said nothing to him then, still unsure of her own heart. The struggle between aspect and incarnate left her in an unenviable position. She neither wanted to be ordered, nor wished to be imbued with the planet's elemental energies, especially given the process's low rate of survival. She had grown lonely, then she had grown tired of being lonely, but that did not drive her into the wings of either faction. Under the influence of order magic, Dragonkind aspired to things Vyranoth simply did not understand. Over the last 200 years, Valdraken's towers and spires had risen over the mountains of Thaldraszus. In the northwest, Neltharion had built a massive citadel and forge where he and the Black Dragonflight manufactured all manner of strange wonders. On the western shores, Ysera and her Greens claimed to have opened a portal into Azeroth's own dreams. And in the south, Malygos and his Blues had built towers and vast... what was the word for them? Libraries. They filled these places with knowledge recorded in stone and parchment from which future generations would learn. Vyranoth had even toured Malygos' grand tower of Vakthros, as well as the beginnings of the Bronze Dragonflight's temporal conflux. Chief among them all was Alexstrasza's ruby life pools, the seat of the Red Dragonflight's power. The life pools rested at the heart of the Broodlands, protected on all sides. They provided a place for whelplings to hatch, grow, and play with no fear of predation. Every whelpling in the Broodlands had the chance to reach their full potential. There was joy and hope in the thought, but also power. In a few generations' time, the Dragonflight's populations might outstrip the Primal Dragon's numbers. The thought both astonished and terrified Vyranoth. Rising from the canyons, she spotted the pool's familiar butt in the distance. Red dragons shimmered in the air around it, and gleaming pillars of marble now rose from the butt's summit. Titan-forged workers scurried across scaffoldings and moved enormous stone blocks into place. How odd, Vyranoth thought. I thought the ruby life pools were complete. What are they building now? As she drew closer, a flash of crimson caught her eye. The Dragon Queen had taken wing. Light blazed off Alexstrasza's ruby scales and gilded horns. Though Vyranoth had grown accustomed to seeing Alexstrasza in her ordered form, it still unsettled her from time to time. The chasm between them mostly went unspoken, but it seemed to have grown wider with each passing decade. "Vyranoth!" Alexstrasza cried, doing a joyful, elegant roll in the air. How good it is to see you, my dear. Tell me, how have you fared of late? Very well, Vyranoth replied, halting to hover in the air. You are positively glowing. I take it all in the Broodlands as well. Indeed, Alexstrasza replied. We've been busy in the decades you've been away. I can see that, Vyranoth replied, peering at the polished creations below. What are you up to now, my old friend? We are adding an upper tier to the Ruby Life Pools, Alexstrasza replied. Our flights have been so prolific we needed more space for eggs. Come, let us fly and I shall show you. Very well, Vyranoth replied, but she smiled a little. Together, Vyranoth and Alexstrasza cruised around the butt, enjoying the beauty of the day and the warm, gentle winds. Below them, the Titan Forged were constructing open-air pools atop the butt, which were, I can't do it, there's any other word they could use instead of butt over and over again, which were fed from the aqueduct that carried water from Tierhold. Green dragons coaxed trees to grow, giving shade to the new pools, while the Reds oversaw construction of a new landing platform. Near the ground, young red drakes minded the whelplings, chasing them through the leafy crimson treetops. The whelplings' giggles echoed through the canyons. The sound brought another smile to Vyranoth's lips. I have wanted to expand these pools for decades, Alexstrasza said with a hint of excitement in her voice. I had to prioritize the construction of Valdraken, then send resources to fortify our borders, but now I can finally bring my vision to life. Why should you need to fortify the borders of the Broodlands? Vyranoth asked with a little chuckle. They banked under the bones of a new archway, one inlaid with gold and opalescent stained glass. Who would dare challenge the might of the aspects? Alexstrasza shot her friend a wry smile. Neltharion takes his charge to defend the Broodlands seriously. Perhaps a little too seriously at times. You have seen the Obsidian Citadel. Ah, you meant the monument he built to his own towering intellect, Vyranoth said playfully, drawing a guilty-sounding chuckle from the Dragon Queen. Not everyone is as open-minded as you, my friend, Alexstrasza said. I will always advocate for peace, but I do not trust my detractors will do the same. We do not know what dangers we may face in the future. Ah, so you do understand the threat Iridikron poses to you, Vyranoth thought. Even if you will not name the threat aloud, you know the Incarnates grow in strength just as you do. Raszageth had been a particular thorn in Alexstrasza's side, as the Storm Eater had delighted in striking down ordered dragons along the Broodlands' borders. Raszageth sometimes flew past Vyranoth's eyrie in the Frozen Fangs, reveling in the power of tempests there. If conflict broke out between the Aspects and the Incarnates, Vyranoth would grapple to maintain her neutrality. Her affection for Alexstrasza was undeniable. However, the intervening centuries had not made Vyranoth trust the Keepers or their magic, nor did she trust the Incarnates, though she certainly empathized with some of their rhetoric. Vyranoth's best hope was peace. Enough talk of philosophy, Alexstrasza said with a smile. Come, I would now introduce you to my new whelplings. Alexstrasza folded her wings and dived into the hollow center of the ruby life pools. Vyranoth followed her down, plummeting past bursts of leafy green foliage and silvery waterfalls. At the bottom, Alexstrasza alighted on a lily-shaped landing pad, one that floated in a shallow pool. Vyranoth settled beside her friend, shaking the condensation of the waterfalls from her wings. The droplets felt almost warm. They tingled along her wing membranes until she shucked them away. The temperature rose as they ventured into the ruby life pools proper. Alexstrasza led Vyranoth into a cavern that housed several large clutches of dragon eggs, red, black, blue, bronze, and green, all of which rested in clear turquoise pools. Lush flora thrived in the heat and humidity, filling the whole space with greenery. Warm golden light radiated from sconces in the walls. Draconid tended the eggs in the pools, singing to them in low, soft tones, telling them stories and cradling them with a strange magic that Vyranoth did not comprehend. As Alexstrasza moved deeper into the space, every Draconid turned and bowed. She acknowledged them with a nod, saying, "As you were," then strode onward. A few of the egg tenders looked at Vyranoth warily, but said nothing. "I believe they will be sleeping." Alexstrasza approached a thick curtain of ivy and vines. She nudged it aside, revealing a private pool, one filled with gigantic lily pads and delicate glowing blooms. 10 newly hatched whelps slept on a thick velvety pad, their scales as soft as dragonfly wings. The whelps' golden irises moved back and forth under their translucent lids as they dreamed. An ornate fountain burbled a lullaby. Vyranoth breathed deep, inhaling the whelp's sweet, yolky scent. The whelps curled together for security, but one boy had rolled away, sleeping on his back and kicking one tiny leg in the air. With a gentle trill, Alexstrasza nudged him back to his siblings. She nuzzled them, then blew a hot breath over their sleeping forms. One whelp, still snoring, reached up and placed a tiny forepaw on Alexstrasza's snout. "Oh, they are beautiful," Vyranoth said in a hushed voice, realizing that she missed having whelps of her own. Her throat tightened as she said, "Congratulations." The sudden rush of emotion took Vyranoth by surprise, particularly longing and want, tinged with something that was almost jealousy. Vyranoth hadn't had a clutch of her own in centuries, nor had she taken a new mate since Galakron slew her last one. "Thank you," Alexstrasza said, smiling at the new whelplings. Vyranoth stepped back from her emotions, examining them, confused by them. Jealousy was not something a dragon like Vyranoth experienced. She possessed a keen intellect, powerful ice magic, and excellent acuity in the air. Larger than most primal dragons, Vyranoth commanded respect and admiration from her peers. She wanted for nothing. Though she was inclined to solitude, she had never lacked for friends or allies. At least until now. Who was left for Vyranoth? So many of Dragonkind's bests had gone to Alexstrasza and the Aspects. Most who remained now followed Iridikron and spouted his fractious rhetoric, leaving Vyranoth caught in the midst of a growing storm. Precious few remained neutral, and those who had were too young and inexperienced, or had paired off and flown far, seeking escape from the tension between the two groups. Yes, Vyranoth was jealous of Alexstrasza, and self-aware enough to realize that the jealousy had started to gnaw away at her heart. If left to fester, it would turn to anger, hatred. She wanted what Alexstrasza had, not just a mate, not just a clutch, but a place in the world. Eventually, she would have to choose, aspect or incarnate, order or nature. She knew the choice wasn't upon her yet, but it stalked closer by the day. "Vyranoth?" Alexstrasza asked, pulling the frost dragon from her thoughts. "Are you all right?" The concern on the Dragon Queen's face was true, the drawn brows, the neutral lips, the slightly narrowed eyes, but Vyranoth couldn't bring herself to be honest or vulnerable with Alexstrasza. Try as she might, the Dragon Queen would not understand the conflict raging in Vyranoth's heart, and she was loath to put her struggles on Alexstrasza today, thus dampening her friend's joy. Vyranoth touched her snout to Alexstrasza's shoulder. "It is wistfulness for a past I cannot forget, nothing more, my friend." Alexstrasza held Vyranoth's gaze for several moments, searching her eyes. Vyranoth felt as though her chest had been laid open and that Alexstrasza could see every beat of her heart. It was unsettling, unnerving. At long last, Alexstrasza smiled and leaned into Vyranoth's side. "We have been friends through all the long centuries, Vyranoth. You know you can tell me anything, don't you?" "I do," Vyranoth said, leaning into Alexstrasza. "Anything but this." As Alexstrasza attended to her official duties that afternoon, Vyranoth lingered in the Broodlands, playing with the older whelps. "You can't find me!" A little green, a tyrannus, giggled from the branches of a nearby tree. Vyranoth stood on an egg tender's path nearby, pretending not to know where the whelpling hid. Two red whelplings perched on her head, Talonstrasza and Laylastrasza, siblings. A blue whelpling, Rygos, toddled in the air near Vyranoth's left shoulder, his tiny wings barely able to keep him afloat. "He's up there," Laylastrasza said, bouncing atop Vyranoth's head. "Look, in that tree." "Which tree?" Vyranoth said, pretending to be confused. She turned her great head from side to side, then pointed at a tree across the river with a large wing talon. "Is it that one?" "No!" the whelplings cried in unison. Vyranoth said, cocking her head. She turned around and pointed at another. "What about that one?" The whelplings howled with laughter. Talonstrasza jumped into the air, fumbled for a moment, then managed to maneuver himself in front of Vyranoth's snout. "Here, I'll show you," he said, motioning to her with one of his 4 feet. With a chuckle, Vyranoth followed the whelpling to the tree, while Talonstrasza, Laylastrasza, and Rygos flew up into the branches, giggling and calling a tyrannus's name. The little green squawked, and the 4 of them burst from the tree in an explosion of leaves. The tyrannus took a tumble, but Vyranoth extended her wing and caught, I don't know which one it is, and caught him on the thick, soft membrane. He bounced once, looked up at her in round-eyed surprise, and laughed. Maybe it is Vyranoth. Vyranoth had often played these kinds of games with her own clutches. It taught whelplings how to use sound to search for their prey, how to hide themselves to avoid being seen, and how to hunt alone and in groups. Vyranoth had to admit it was a delight to spend time with the whelplings, even if they were not her own. Inexplicably, there were fewer whelplings in the Dragon Wilds these days. Here it goes back to that. Who wants to hide next? Vyranoth asked, bouncing a Tyrannus back into the air. Talonstraws? Leylastraza? No, Leylastraza said, landing on Vyranoth's head and hiding in the Frost Dragon's thick mane. I'm too scared to be alone. What? Vyranoth asked with a chuckle. Why should you be afraid, little one? I want to stay with you, Leylastraza replied, burrowing against Vyranoth's neck. Bemused, Vyranoth replied, Well, I suppose you can help me look. Talonstraws? I don't want to hide either, the little red dashed under Vyranoth's wing. They might take me. What are you talking about? Vyranoth said with a forced chuckle. In all her years she had never seen whelplings act like this, and their fears gave her pause. Who are they? The eyes in the rocks, Leylastraza said in a muffled voice, gripping the primal dragon's mane in her tiny talons. Vyranoth looked askance at a nearby red draconid. The creature lifted its shoulders in a shrug. Her frown deepened. Young whelplings sometimes had strange ideas, it was true, but in the Broodlands they did not need to fear predation like they did in the wilds. The ordered dragons raised their young communally, and the red dragonflight ensured that all whelplings were cared for, loved, and protected. From what Vyranoth understood, parents were allowed to be as involved or as uninvolved in their offspring's lives as they wanted. Red dragons lounged on ledges overhead while Draconid patrolled the ravines and kept a watchful eye on the whelplings. No predators could get close to these little ones, at least nothing large enough to hurt them, so why were they afraid? You are safe in the Broodlands, Vyranoth told the whelplings, nudging Talonstraws with her snout. He clung to her leg. Nothing will hurt you here. Talonstraws turned up his big golden eyes to look at her. The trust in his expression melted her heart just a little. There are creatures that hide in the rocks. I've seen them. They took me when I was little. Took you? Vyranoth asked. Took you from where? From home, Talonstraws replied. Come now, Vyranoth said gently, though the conversation put her nerves on a talon's edge. Eyes in the rocks? Whelplings who believe they've been kidnapped. You have nothing to fear. Talonstraws shook his head. Fine, I'll hide, Rygos said, shooting a little puff of arcane fire at Leylastraza. The little red made an annoyed chirp as Rygos disappeared through a stone archway. Despite her concerns, Vyranoth spent the rest of a very happy afternoon with the whelplings, playing their invented games, watching them hunt bugs, and asking them about their lives in the Broodlands. She tried to cajole Leylastraza or Talonstraws to tell her more of their fears, but both whelplings just squeezed their eyes shut and shook their heads. Truth be told, any number of things could have happened to the siblings, from getting lost in a dark cave to an encounter with something scary. None of the other whelplings Vyranoth encountered suffered the same distress. Whether green or black, bronze, blue, or red, most of the whelplings Vyranoth met were boisterous and content, far more so than they might have been in the Dragon Wilds even. As the sun fell toward the horizon, Vyranoth said her goodbyes to the whelplings, and Alexstrasza returned to the waking shores. Vyranoth, Alexstrasza said, landing on the riverbank. The whelplings squealed in delight when they saw the queen, and she smiled at them as they swarmed around her and perched on her horns. I must apologize. Today's business took me away for far longer than I thought it would. Our half-giant neighbors aren't particularly friendly and continue to vex us. There is no need for an apology, Vyranoth replied, lifting her head. 3 whelplings still clung to her mane, begging for one last game. I spent a lovely afternoon with the whelplings, but now I must be going. I am forever pulled away by my duties, Alexstrasza said with a sigh, lowering her head to allow the Draconid to collect the protesting whelps. At the very least, I can fly with you to the borders of the Broodlands. I would like that, Vyranoth said. As they flew west, dusk drew her great comforting wing over the sky. The stars blinked awake one by one. In the distance, the great forges of Neltharion's obsidian citadel burned bright, and though Vyranoth had enjoyed the day, she wanted nothing more than to leave the Broodlands and return to the familiar icy halls of her home in the north. The 2 dragons paused at the border to say their goodbyes. I wish you would stay, Alexstrasza said. I can feel the loneliness in your heart, Vyranoth. Ordered or not, you are always welcome among us. My idea for the ruby life pools came from the days we spent defending our clutches from Galakrond. It came from you. Nothing would make me happier than to see you stay. A pang of longing resonated through Vyranoth's chest. How she wished they could go back to that less complicated time when dragons were dragons and their lives were full of simple joys and known dangers. For even when Vyranoth came to visit the Broodlands, Alexstrasza barely had time for her. The responsibilities of leadership weighed heavily upon the Dragon Queen. Everything had changed, everything except Vyranoth. Like the great glaciers in the north, she moved with deliberate slowness, taking years and sometimes decades to make up her mind in a matter. "I cannot," Vyranoth said. "You have built something truly extraordinary in the Broodlands, Alexstrasza, but there is no place for me here, much as I wish there were." "That is not true," Alexstrasza said, clutching her forefeet into fists. It was something she had always done when despairing. "Vyranoth, there is room enough for you in the Broodlands. There is room enough for everyone." Vyranoth beat her wings, hovering in the air. "But you would not take me as I am, not truly. I would be forced to submit to the Keeper's order magic to be a part of your flights. I have shown you our advancements, our cities and towers, our forges and gardens," Alexstrasza said, her voice choked. "You have sat with the aspects, played with our whelplings, flown with our finest, and shared meals with my own family. What more must I do, Vyranoth, to help you understand? You are one of my oldest and dearest friends. I want you by my side. The horizon grows ever darker, and I do not wish to face it without you." For the space of a heartbeat, Vyranoth felt herself being taken away by the emotion of the moment. She saw that path splayed before her, a community, a mate, whelplings. But at what cost? It would be so easy to compromise her beliefs, to trade them for happiness, but she would have to live that happiness in a different skin. Whatever brood she had would be yoked to that choice. Vyranoth would not make that choice for them. And the flights, they owed something to the Keepers, the defense of the world, or so they said. In practice, Vyranoth feared it would mean relinquishing herself for the greater good. It would mean giving them the ice in her veins and the wind under her wings, and that was not a sacrifice she was willing to make. She was Vyranoth now and always. No one would take that away from her, not even her oldest and dearest friend. "I am sorry, Alexstrasza," Vyranoth said, "but I cannot follow you toward that horizon." And with that, she closed her wings and dived for the border, leaving Alexstrasza alone in the skies. She thought she heard the Dragon Queen call her name, but Vyranoth did not turn back. For several turns of the moons, Vyranoth tried not to think of that day at the Ruby Life Pools, nor how Alexstrasza had asked her to join the 5 flights. She could not imagine allowing Titan magic to change her, even if it would allow her to stay by Alexstrasza's side. The Keepers found Vyranoth and her primal kin wanting. They found the whole of the world wanting, which was why they had forced their order upon it. But the planet was already perfect in its innate beauty. Why should it be forced to submit to the Titan's whims? Why should Alexstrasza and her flights hold the Titan's views so much higher than those of their own kind? After all, hadn't the illustrious Tyr failed to defeat Galakrond? Hadn't 5 primal dragons working together found a way to fell that beast? And if Vyranoth knew the story true, why then did Alexstrasza feel she needed the Titan's power at all? How had her own strength not proven sufficient? These were the thoughts that rolled in Vyranoth's mind day in and day out as seasons passed. While she could certainly understand the Aspect's desire for greater power, it seemed naive to trust the Keepers. Hadn't their Titan forged, trapped and captured primal dragons in the north? Even if Alexstrasza and the other Aspects had fought to free those poor creatures, the damage had been done. It was obvious the Titans in their creation saw dragonkind as little more than servants, or worse, as thralls. Perhaps that was why the flight's oaths gave Vyranoth such pause. She would not serve a force she neither knew nor understood. Could Alexstrasza say truthfully that her Keepers would never ask her to do something she disagreed with? And if it came to that, what then? One afternoon, Vyranoth could not sit with these thoughts any longer. She left her eyrie and took wing. The cold, icy gales that whipped around the peaks were a panacea to her, easing her troubled heart and chasing away her doubts. Overhead, the clouds rumbled and roiled. Webs of lightning raced along their bellies, an unusual sight this far to the north, where the air was usually too cold to produce such phenomena. The snows had yet to fall, but she could sense the blizzards swirling in the skies above. Vyranoth reveled in the storm that swirled around the mountaintops, enjoying the fierce frozen day. The sheer power of the storm was a delight, and perhaps in one dark small corner of her heart, Vyranoth could understand why Alexstrasza might seek a stronger wind under her wings. Regardless, the Dragon Queen should have sought such power from the world itself, not from an external force. As Vyranoth soared around one of the peaks, enjoying the wind in her mane, a familiar voice thundered from the clouds.
Vyranoth, I did not realize you enjoyed chasing the gales.
Is that you, Razageth? Vyranoth halted, turning her attention skyward. It wasn't unusual for the incarnate to follow the winds across the dragon wilds. With a laugh like the crackle of lightning, a large primal dragon dipped from the clouds. For a dragon so young, Razageth nearly matched Vyranoth in size. Part of that was due to having been imbued with the very element of storm, no doubt. Rumor said the Storm Eater was capricious, volatile, but Vyranoth had never sensed any malice from the incarnate. On the contrary, Razageth seemed to exude a wild glee, a feeling that Vyranoth had experienced little of late.
Who else but me?
Razageth said, tossing her head. Sparks snapped between her four great horns.
I hope you do not mind the unannounced intrusion. I am here to follow the storm and not else. But since you are here, would you like to fly with me?
Fly with you? Vyranoth said, giving her wings a great beat to rise higher in the skies.
And where shall we go? Anywhere we want,
Razageth said with a grin.
Let us see how great a gale we can whip up with our wings. Let us make the greatest of blizzards to shake the sky.
It sounded like the right sort of distraction to take Vyranoth's mind off the concerns that had tormented her for so long. So with a nod of her head, she followed Razageth into the maelstrom. They spent a thrilling afternoon racing through those peaks, stirring the storm into a frenzy. The winds howled in Vyranoth's ears and toward her wings. They ducked and dived, spiraling through the storm. The snows raged, each flake sharp enough to shred a lesser dragon's wings. Lightning arced through the sky, answering the incarnate's call. Razageth challenged Vyranoth to wild, death-defying games. They would plunge toward the ground, and the last to halt their descent would be declared the victor. Vyranoth lost this game every time. She was far more cautious than the Storm Eater. However, Vyranoth often bested the incarnate in breakneck races to the peaks, sometimes dodging past great bolts of lightning to a win. Razageth was not trying to harm her, but the incarnate wasn't afraid of alarming the older dragon either. Despite the chill of the storm and her companion's rather unnerving penchant for danger, Vyranoth's blood burned in her veins. Her heart pounded in her chest. She could not recall a time in which she had felt so alive, not in many, many long years. And not just alive, liberated, free. She stopped thinking about her loneliness, about the aspects in the incarnates, and about their keepers and their loathsome order magic. She stopped thinking, stopped worrying, and just lived. As the day began to die, Vyranoth and Razageth let the storm ebb. They landed on a ledge just north of Vyranoth's eyrie, watching the winds settle and the snows drift away.
You realize that you could become as I am, Razageth said, giving her head a shake. Incarnate, ever powerful.
Did Eridikron tell you to say that to me? Vyranoth said without malice.
No, Razageth said, chuckling. I merely sense that you are a kindred spirit. I have friends in all the far-flung corners of the world, but few of them revel in the storm as you do. Fewer still can bear the wrath of my maelstroms.
Vyranoth turned her head to the sky, watching the storm continue to ease into a gentle snowfall. It has been many long years since I have felt so free.
Perhaps that is because you are listening to your instincts rather than fighting them, Razageth said. You can imagine how much more free you'd feel after being imbued with the elements, can you?
Her features twisted into a smile.
It is dangerous, very dangerous, but I believe you have what it takes to embrace the elements and master their powers, should you so choose.
The suggestion gave Vyranoth pause, then Razageth continued.
However, it matters not what you are to me, so long as you love the storm. Friends?
Vyranoth's breath caught in her throat, but otherwise she made no outward sign of her surprise. Friends, just like that. Vyranoth barely knew Razageth, but perhaps there was a kinship there, forged in storm, in understanding, in acceptance. Friends, Vyranoth said with a nod. The incarnate grinned.
Come then,
she said, launching herself back into the air.
I will show you stronger winds, and we shall truly be free, fly free.
All right, so we have wrapped another one. We're kind of getting the inkling of, yes, what's going to cause the break. We see time having passed, the tensions continuing to grow, and we also see now a couple inroads of specifically this Razageth as how Vyranoth could eventually join the Incarnates. And we have another episode in the pipe, 5x5. So, as always, thank you everyone so much for watching and for listening. And I look forward to seeing you all next time on Lore of Warcraft.